Here is a testimonial for the highest paid part-time job in the world from Katrina Alexander.
So I'm approaching 3 years in this academy. All of my accounts have increased trading, investments, business, and personal accounts. This academy can produce results in all areas of your life when you do the work. Yes, you have to work on your psychology and mindset to get the results.
How you doing? This is David W. Williams, also known as a retail trader. Appreciate y'all for coming in this afternoon. Know we probably around lunchtime for some of y'all. My West Coast people are still gonna be relatively early in the morning. For my international people, there's no telling what time of the day it is, right? But I appreciate you also coming in. I know some of my UK people is starting to get late in the afternoon, but appreciate everybody for being here. And so what I want to really quickly deal with is this particular issue where we want to talk about economic warfare being a finite game. And this situation with Congressman Byron Donalds is an example of what I'm talking about. So one thing I've done on this channel is continue to try to press this particular issue, that you are engaged in economic warfare. Many of you do not know that you're engaged in economic warfare. You were born in this particular war and you're going to die in this particular war. And it's not giving you that message to make you apathetic about it. It's trying to help you understand that there's things that you can do to make sure that the people that are going to be here when you're gone are will not have to have the same negative experiences that you've had. It doesn't mean that you may get there by yourself before you leave, but the goal of it is really to start to plant the seeds so that the people that are going to be here after you're gone won't have to deal with the same situation that you had to deal with. Because by us not doing anything, what we're saying is that the people that are going to be here after us, it's perfectly appropriate for them to deal with the same thing that we've dealt with, even though we act like we don't like it, right? So we're going to use this particular situation as an example, but we're also going to go into some of the investing space. We're going to talk about investments, how people should perceive investments. We're going to talk about funding of investments, because that's something that I wanted to touch on, and I haven't really been able to get the topic around it. So I think this would be a good time to kind of introduce that, right? Also, we're going to get into how to conduct yourself with the political structure, and not necessarily what you may need to be doing right now, but how you should start thinking about, if you get into rooms with politicians, how are you going to conduct yourself? What do you believe is appropriate behavior based on what you believe you're there for? And I think that's really, really important, because if we are in a scenario and we're fanned out, we're just so pleased that this particular politician will have a meeting with us, we can fan out and not really deal with our issues. However, if we don't walk in the room with issues, then there's no issues to deal with. And so that's something that we want to talk about. So Congressman Byron Donalds is a congressperson from the state of Florida. I think he's over an area in Southwest Florida that represents, well, I'm from, we call it Naples, Florida. I think that's in this area. It's a primarily Anglo area that he represents. And the word on the street, right, and that's just using as a colloquialism, is that he's going to run for governor in the state of Florida in the next, I guess, opportunity to run. I don't think he's announced yet, but a lot of people believe that he's trying to set up the run for governor in the state of Florida. So one of the ways in which he's going to have to do that is going to raise his visibility, because most people in the state of Florida don't really know who he is. He's tried to attach himself to Trump. He didn't become part of the Trump administration. So I think now he's going to try to say, well, my next promotion in this particular Republican Party will be governor. But even if he does not become governor, it can also, again, raise his profile, which can raise his status to where more people know him, which can set him up for opportunities down the road. So they've kind of used him. Something that he tries to kind of talk about is that his angle and the way in which he tries to appeal to Black voters is to come from the economic side. And that's cool, right? But the challenge is what he's saying, does it actually make sense? So he's one of the people that talked about how he wanted to privatize Social Security. And he's talked about some other things. The challenge is that if we don't know what's being said to us, somebody can say anything to us and we'll go for it. So something I've really tried to work very hard for the people that are around me is to improve your economic intelligence. So when you sit in rooms of people like this and they start talking to you, you actually know what they're talking about. And so they just can't say anything to you and you go for it. Because of my personal opinion, right, as a Florida native, and I can say this, and Byron Donald is not a Florida native, I think Byron's a professional BSer, like a lot of politicians. I think he tries to figure out what the crowd wants to hear out of him, and he says it at that time, right? I think he's a professional BSer, but most politicians are professional BSers. Therefore, I wouldn't be swayed by anything that he says, okay? So the question we want to kind of ask ourselves, right, to start this thing off, because we're talking about how you engage with this particular political structure. Do you approach politicians with your plans, right? Or do you have them give you their plans? And I think that's really, really important. So first, when you're dealing with a politician, do you have a plan to give them? Because we're going to kind of talk about this. So let me show you this real quick, right? And I think this has a lot to do with class, right? And so this particular breakdown is not really what I wanted, but it's what I could put together in a short amount of time, right? So what we see is that politicians will deal with people different based on where they're at from a class standpoint. Because based on where people are at from a class standpoint, their expectations for politicians can be different, right? So based on where you're currently at on this particular class structure, and I said, again, I'm going to come up with something a little bit more granular than this because I think this is very generalized, right? Is what is your expectation of a politician, but do you come in with a plan? So if you are working class, working poor, or even middle class, do you believe that politicians should execute on your plan? Or do you believe that you should listen to a politician and then you should say, well, I like or don't like what they have to say, right? And so this is always interesting when I hear people talk about politicians. I was listening to one particular broadcast. It was a bunch of college-educated Black women, and they were saying, well, I like what this politician says. I thought they were smarter than that because I've never dealt with a politician and they were valid or not valid based on what I thought I liked what they said. To me, the goal is you're going to do what I want you to do, right? Now, I can dislike what you say, right? So you can make a statement and I say, I don't agree with that, right? But me thinking that you're a good candidate for my vote because I like how you, to me, it's not a beauty contest, right? And I'm not from an upper part of the American class structure, right? I'm not on the, the multi-million-dollar level, but I've been politically educated to look at things differently, right? So a lot of times based on your class structure, the way you interact with politicians, because when they have these town hall meetings, they're not having those for millionaires, right? They're not having those for the most successful people in your city. They're having those normally for working class and working poor people, maybe a few of the middle class, or going to these town hall meetings where these politicians sit up and they pontificate and they bring the cameras in and everybody gets emotionally riled up and we think we've accomplished something, right? So that's something that you really want to ask yourself, right? First off, the question for you is, right? Because we're not going to talk about Byron Donald, we're going to talk about you. Do you approach politicians with your plans, or do you have them let them give you their plan? And so that's something that you need to ask yourself, right? Because if you're currently always dissatisfied with something, then the question you want to ask is, what is your plan? There was this guy I used to know, and he don't like me, and that's cool. And he would always be talking about these different groups that have an agenda. And I'd asked him, well, what's your agenda? And he couldn't answer that because he was in a stage of his life where everything was somebody else's agenda. This group got an agenda. This group got an agenda. I say, cool. Well, what's your agenda then? Nothing. So we see what the problem is. The problem is not those other people. The problem is that you don't have an agenda that you're looking to execute, right? So we talked about politicians deal with voters different based on their belief of the voters' power. So based on where politicians believe this particular group of voters have power is how they're going to deal with you, right? And that's what I want you to understand. So the experience that you may have with a politician, if you're coming in as a $40 or $50 or $60,000 a year worker, right, can be different than when you come in as a multi-million-dollar person, or you're at a $10,000 dinner plate dinner for a particular political party. They're going to deal with you differently because their belief of your power is going to always be different, right? So then we're talking about working class people, working poor people, but even middle class people, right? Not having a lot of political advocacy. Politicians will deal with them different because their attitude is that if you're displeased, it's easy for me to get you back on board by just telling you what you want to hear. because you don't have a real plan that you're bringing to the table, right? So the quickest way to check yourself about a politician is what's your plan? Not the politician's plan. What's your plan? What do you want that politician to do? Right? And so when I see people, and this happened during Trump's run, where people are asking Byron Donald, well, what do you think about reparations? This is where we go into where this stuff becomes entertainment. Because if we want reparations, we don't ask him what he thinks, because what he thinks is not relevant to the issue. Because AIPAC's not asking him what he thinks about aid to Israel. They're not asking him what he thinks. They're asking him, is he on board or is he not on board for aid to Israel? That's all they ask him. So we haven't gotten the confidence yet to feel like our political agenda and our political desires are valid enough to where we can tell people that's what we want. That's the insecurity that we have from a lot of conditions inside the United States, right? Because AIPAC doesn't ask politicians, what do you think about aid to Israel? They say, are you on board or not on board to aid to Israel? Then we're going to deal with you accordingly based on your response to that. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? So it's interesting why everybody is so confident on the internet. Everybody is so this and so that and yada, yada, yada. But in the real world, when it's time to really deal with these people in the real world, nobody can find their courage. Nobody can find their backbone. Nobody has a voice, yada, yada, yada. So, and they know that about you. So that's why they do what they do. And I'm going to kind of show you what I'm talking about, right? So that's kind of what we're going to go into. So again, we're not going to deal with him because he's going to be who he is because the system allows him to do it. And nobody holds his feet to the fire for anything. So he's just allowed to BS his way through the situation. So he had a meeting with this group out of Atlanta, right? They're based out of Atlanta. And I guess they came to, I don't know, maybe it might have been Tallahassee or either DC to talk to him, right? I don't know which one. And he was explaining that he has a particular economic plan to, I would say, empower, right, people at a certain economic level. And he was explaining why he was for or against this particular plan. And I guess it was supposed to be part of his pitch to show that, you know what, I'm very, very much economic centered. This what makes me different than a lot of the left-wing black politicians, yada, yada, yada. That sounds good, but you're talking to somebody that's actually in the markets, right? So I'm looking at the markets all the time. I'm always studying. I'm always reading, right? And I teach other people about how these spaces work. You can't fool me with something that's very cream puff, right? It just won't work on me. It might work on other people, but it won't work on me because I know what you're saying and I know what you're not saying. So let's go ahead and get into this particular video. Hopefully we got audio because I want to kind of break this down because, again, see this group of people that are sitting down talking to him, right? If you're in awe of a politician, you're already out of position. It don't matter who they are, right? They already got you out of position. And positioning is real important, right? There can be a respect. But if you're in awe of a politician, you're already out of position because that's not your job as a voter to be in awe of a politician, right? But if you don't believe that, then you will be in awe of a politician because you like them. So that's why, you know, you had all those, this has happened multiple times where they went to DC to go see Trump, but they didn't go with any kind of policy or legislation in their hand. They went to try to hype themselves on social media. So it's easy to keep you happy because I just got to let you get close to me. You know, that's kind of part of the personality thing that we got going on, not just in politics, but across the board, where you're not really coming in with a plan. You're coming in just kind of to be on the scene and you just kind of want to see who's there. It's a great networking opportunity, yada, yada, yada. But there's no legislation that you're trying to push. That should be your reason for being there. So let's go ahead and go into this real quick. So hopefully we got audio.
One of the things that I'm pushing for is a repeal of what's called the Accredited investor rule.
Yes.
How that works is, I'm gonna get high level. So
no, you excited me.
I know he's excited. I saw because he pointed now. I just had to address it.
I don't want to get started.
He's been talking about this for 2 days.
I don't think people understand. He does, but I don't think people understand how critical this is.
Right.
So let's take Snapchat, right? When Snapchat was created by the coders that founded Snapchat, when it was being created, the Snapchat founders did a thing that anybody that creates a company and you're trying to find capital, they do, is they go looking for investors. And we typically go for investors in venture capital funds, private equity funds, private debt markets, whatever the case might be. There's nothing wrong with those markets. People are going to them to find capital for their business. But what happens is is that if you're not an accredited investor, you're not allowed to participate in that fledgling investment because the United States says you don't have enough experience. And so you could be taken advantage of in the investment and you could lose your money in the investment and be damaged. So the United States, we stop people who have less than $1 million in net worth and less than $200,000 in annual income from being able to invest early in a Snapchat, in PayPal, in all these various technological advancements. So when you, in my view of the world, when you merge digital assets with the repeal of the accredited investor rule, now you have an entire industry where people who might have $1,000, $2,000, they're working a job, they come across a company and say, you know what, I think I want to invest in that company. Now, are they going to become Elon Musk off of that? Probably not. But can they turn that $1,000 investment to $100,000 or $200,000 or $500,000?
Absolutely.
Because the actual investment paid off.
Okay, so what he was trying to explain, and if hopefully you can hear the audio, was that he wants to repeal the Accredited Investor Act, where you have to show a particular net worth or a particular amount of income per year over a certain amount of years, I think with you and your spouse, and maybe it could be more, to get into what we call private offerings, right? So what we have is that before a company, even way before the IPO stage, they try to raise money through the private markets, okay? And if the government says that if we feel like you're not at a certain level financially, you don't have access to that. Now, Obama created something to where now you can create a crowd fund and you can get people that are not accredited investors. So I'm not sure what he's doing is going to be different than that, because to me, it could be low-key redundant. But it sounds like a good thing. And he says, well, I'm going to go high level. That was not a high level explanation. I guess it may be to them, but to me, it's not. Right? There was nothing high level about what he said. Okay. So here's one of the challenges. He used Snapchat as a explanation. Okay. Snapchat is a very, very badly managed company. Like most people don't even think about Snapchat. Most people are not on Snapchat. It's a bad example. Also, the example of merging tech with the repeal of that particular act. Again, it's playing to a very unsophisticated retail crowd. This idea to where you're just going to get rich because you're going to associate yourself to tech, that doesn't mean anything, especially digital technology. It doesn't mean anything, right? The world really doesn't work that way, but people think that because they really don't know, because we live in a media to where if we just attach tech to something, people think they got something hot, right? Because people really don't know what tech is. Again, I'm going to tell you this, and I've been saying this. Guns are technology. Most people don't know what they don't know what that is. They don't know that guns are technology. Well, again, the majority of the world can't make a gun. That's how high-tech guns are, right? So the problem is that we don't really understand how this stuff works. So it's easy for a guy to sit us in a room and just BS us. And some of the same people that are supposed to be so qualified and they took this test and yada, 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 they're the main people that's BSing us. Right. And so that's why we got to really make sure that we got a good understanding on our own. So when we get in these type of environments, people can't just feed us anything and we think they're telling us something. And this is some high level game we're getting. So let's kind of get into it. Right. So an accredited investor, right, is somebody by the SEC, says the individual meets certain financial qualifications, holds specific credentials, and able to invest in private securities offerings. Right. So net worth, having a net worth over 1 million, excluding the value of their primary residence, right? So that's going to be difficult. Because a lot of people, if you own a home in California, you got a $1 million net worth. Easy. I've seen homes in South Central that's $1.5 million. That's easy work if you live in Southern Cali, right? Live in the Bay, that's easy work, right? New York City, that's easy work. But they wanted to be excluding the value of the primary residence. Then income's going to be owning over $200,000 annually, or $300,000 jointly with a spouse for the last 2 years, with the exception of earning the same or more in the current year. So all my accounting people, they can kind of really break that down. They know the granular details of it, but that's pretty much what the general details is. Okay, so here's the issue when you're looking at this deal, okay? And this is what I would tell anybody that doesn't really understand how these markets actually function. If you're making under a certain amount of money, and we're going to kind of get into a breakdown of how companies raise money when they go through their particular rounds, I want you to understand something. So let's say me and GC start a business, right? Okay, we're looking to raise money for the business. for it to make sense for us to do it, once we get past what we call our angel investor round, or some people call the pre-seed stage, but like we go to angel investors, normally it's going to be friends and family, right? That's what maybe give us our initial startup capital. But even with then, this situation that I'm going to talk about could be relevant. Once we get past that stage, we start going through our series funding, which is going to be kind of classified by a letter of the alphabet. It's going to be difficult for you to get in if you can't put a certain amount of money in the deal, right? So nobody's coming to you and saying, hey, you know what? We're doing Series A, and if you invest $1,000, you can get in Series A. No, you cannot, because the $1,000 is not worth our time. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? You have to be able to put in a certain amount of money to even get in the deal. Right? So if you don't have a certain amount of money coming in your life because of the amount of money that you make on your job, or you don't have a net worth and you don't have assets that you can liquidate to get in these deals, the deal don't make sense for you anyway. So that's why the Tulsa saying, well, you can get in for a minimum of $500. It attracted a lot of lower income people because why? You can get in for $500. But you can't get in no Series A funding with no $500. You can't get in with a few $1,000s, right? We're talking about minimum hundreds of thousands of dollars up to millions of dollars that you're going to need to get in. So the reason why Nas can get in some of these early deals is because he has the money to get in, right? So he has the network plus the money. But Nas is not getting in these deals for $20,000. It doesn't work that way. And so to tell them that we're going to get rid of this particular requirement is not really going to help them. They're still going to end up in crowdfunding deals where you can get into these deals with very, very low initial investment of a few $1,000s, right? And I have people that send me these little investment deals all the time. Most of them ain't worth nothing, but I have a person that I know that I'm cool with, and they be sending me these deals and they be finding out. I like them because I like to just look at deals and read deals. Well, most of them ain't worth nothing, right? Because there's a reason why, and I want you to understand something. There is normally a reason why, if you're running a company, that private money won't deal with you, right? There's a reason why junk bonds won't deal with you. Like there's a reason why these other marketplaces have decided to not deal with you. So now you're going to people that don't know up from down to try to get them to invest in your deal. It's not always a negative, but there's normally a reason why, right? Because you have firms out there that are always looking for deal flow. They're looking to put the money in stuff. So that's what I want you to understand is that if you don't understand how these spaces work and you don't have the money, this won't do anything for you. Then if you do understand how these spaces work, you know that, hey, if I make $100,000 a year, right, which for most people is a lot, they think that's a lot of money, right? Outside of my home, I don't have $1 million net worth. I'm not a good candidate for these deals anyway. I might be a good candidate for real estate syndication, but I'm not a good candidate to invest in a tech startup because I don't have enough money to put in the deal to make sense for the people that are looking to raise capital, right? So he could have never got that to even like, I wouldn't even entertain this. I'd be like, dude, what are you talking about? I know how these particular deals work, right? I know that I'm putting out a report about a company where they got $3.4 billion from the Canadian government to build out satellite infrastructure, right? That's the kind of money it takes for them to get to the next stage of their business. We can't break $3.4 billion down into $500 lots. It take too long. And it take us forever to raise that kind of money, right? So that's what I want you to understand is that when we don't understand how these conversations work, and I'm saying this and I'm going to keep telling you this over and over again, when you don't understand these economic conversations, people will play in your face all day because they're playing a finite game. A finite game is that there's defined winners and losers and there's a defined outcome, right? The defined winner and losers have already been defined. The goal is to make sure that the people that are currently losing keep losing. And we know we want the outcome to be, which is what we get on top and the people under us stay under us. So we never go give them the proper education to actually understand how to navigate these type of spaces, even though they quote unquote got college degrees, they so educated, yada, 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 because he couldn't have talked to me like this and I would have went for it. First, he used a Snapchat. Let me explain something to you real quick before I get to the next one. I don't want to sidetrack it. I was media buying. You know how I knew Snapchat wasn't going to make it? Because nobody that I knew that bought media, and I knew guys that were spending like $50,000 a week buying media, none of them bought media on Snapchat. So I knew Snapchat wasn't going to make it, right? Because nobody was buying ads on Snapchat. And when you have a social media company that goes public, you know how you make money if you don't do subscriptions? You know how you make money? You sell ads, right? Pinterest sells ads, Facebook sells ads, YouTube sells ads, right? Right? Everybody sells ads, right? TikTok eventually, if they're not currently doing it now, eventually is going to go to selling ads, right? So what I want you to realize is that when I realized that people were not buying Snapchat's media, and Snapchat was not appealing to media buyers, because the CEO, what he should have done was find out who's some of the top media buyers in the world. You can find it out. And put all those guys in a room and say, what do I need to do to get y'all to spend money on my platform? He never did that. So Snapchat at one time had the youth. The youth used to be on Snapchat, right? They had the youth and they had pornography, right? Two very, very lucrative categories, right? They lost the youth to TikTok. And then once they lost the youth, then they lost the pornography. Where they went back to Twitter, they went to OnlyFans doing what they're doing. But Snapchat used to have the youth and they used to have pornography. Two very, very lucrative categories. They could have made a lot of money running ads on, right? But the CEO was clueless as to how to actually run that business. He raised the money and couldn't run it, right? So him using Snapchat as an example, that don't even make any sense, but he knows that I'm just going to throw something at the wall and I can just BS these people inside his office and they go for it. And I've seen this happen a large part of my life, right? And until people on certain levels of the economy, and I'm going to say this again, right? Until people on certain levels of this economy and certain levels of this class structure decide that these type of relationships no longer make sense to them, they're going to keep getting what they're getting. But it's so comfortable, right? And I'm not saying comfortable to where people don't have trials and tribulations. What I'm saying comfortable is that I have a lot of things that distract me to stay at these levels here, where you're working poor, working class, and you're lower middle class, right? Because working poor, working class, and lower middle class inside the United States, they have all the creature comforts of middle class and upper middle class people. They may not have as much, but they do have them, right? You go to other parts of the world, if you don't have money, you don't have nothing. You don't have electricity and plumbing inside your house. So until people at these levels decide that, you know what, these type of relationships no longer work for me, they just going to keep doing what they're doing. Because Byron Donald, he's trying to move up in this particular class structure. He wants to be at this level. And so if he got to sit there and BS working class people to get there, well, that's what he going to do, because that ain't nothing different than what he currently been doing. We already know, man, if you flip, you'll flop. So he flipped a long time ago. So I know he'll flop, right? That's the game we playing out here. So let's keep going, right? Because I want to do this breakdown real quick. So the ultimate goal, right, to start up funding stages, because I want you to kind of understand this by stages. And the reason why I want you to understand this is that when you sit down with somebody and they tell you I'm a venture capital, I'm a VC, like, you're not impressed, because you shouldn't be impressed, right? What companies have they taken public? What companies have they exited with at certain dollar amounts? Like, what's their portfolio? Somebody just telling you, you know, I'm a VC and they got a suit on and they got a finance degree from, I don't care what school they went to. They could have been taught by aliens on Mars. What companies have they taken public, right? And what have they exited at what dollar amounts? Where are those companies at? Do we know them? Right? Because just being a VC don't mean nothing. To me, it don't. Right? But it may mean something to you. And, you know, a lot of times, because we're very much status oriented, we're very much what we call prestige badge oriented. If somebody says, hey, man, you know, I went to Harvard and I got a nice suit on and I'm a VC, we think that means something. Right? But when you start really getting into the details of what they got going on, they really haven't done anything as a VC, right? This is just their pivot to try to make it look like they got something popping. Okay, so let's keep going. Average round, we got a seed round, Series A, Series B, Series C. Okay, so let's break the rounds down, right? So when you first start off, they got something called pre-seed funding, okay? Some people don't do that. Some people do that, okay? But what we're going to get into is your seed funding. That's normally going to be friends, families, angels, investors, right? So one of the challenges that we have as Black people, right, because of our history in this particular country, because of what we've been through, we don't have networks of capital. right? We just really don't. And we've been shut out of a lot of networks of capital. The reason why Nas got included is because those dudes wanted to include a black person in their deals. That's just the truth, right? They wanted to, they were doing I won't want to say this the wrong way. So they wanted to include a black person in their deals. That's why they brought Nas in, because they're really big fans of rap music. That's how he got brought in. Nas don't add nothing to those deals except money. He don't add any kind of business expertise. The dude's been a rapper his whole life, right? He's never ran a label. But they just wanted to say, hey, man, we got Nas in on these deals. And it makes them feel good. That's how Nas got in. Big up to him. It worked out for him, right? But one of the biggest issues is that we don't have networks of people that have an extra $250,000, extra $1 million that they can lose. We don't know those kind of people because of our history in this particular country and because of what class we come from. So often when we want to start a company, we can't even get to seed funding. So that's one of the reasons why Obama did what he did and say, hey, you could do a crowdfunding, because we were locked out of raising capital because you only can raise capital from accredited investors, right? And so that was when we don't know accredited investors. So then we couldn't raise capital, right? And it's hard to get money for a business if you don't already, through traditional methods like banks, if you don't already have money going through the business, right? Because banks going to ask you for your cash flows. Well, it's a pre-revenue startup. There are no cash flows. Then they'd be like, well, we can't help you. You got no collateral. You got no cash flows. So what are we loaning against? Nothing. So we can't help you. So we got locked out of a lot of spaces for that. But one thing you realize is that certain people can go to friends, family, and they know VCs or they know angel investors. And they're able to get money through those people initially to get something going. And that's really, really important, because this is the highest risk time of the business. Because why? There's nothing going right now. So we could take this money and just burn it up. So because a lot of us, again, because of what class we really come from, not the performance that we're trying to put on the internet, not the lies that we're telling ourselves, not the level of consumerism that we're involved in, is because we don't have this. And we see there's one guy, and I'm not going to put his name out there because I see straight through what he's doing. He's telling everybody how on YouTube that he's a millionaire and he got this, and he's going to a working class, lower class audience and asking them to donate money. And my question would be, if you got so much money and you live in a certain neighborhood, how come your network can't finance you? Right? But he knows his audience will never ask that question because he already did a capital raise on his audience based on his YouTube. So he knows my audience is very, very unsophisticated on how these things work. I can keep going back to them and raising money off of them while telling them I'm a millionaire. Right? And he knows they don't know any better. See what I'm saying? So he's using his audience to finance his ventures, and he's going to launch a business off the back of what they've donated to find, and they can't tell the difference. Right? So that's what I want you to understand, is that this is because often we don't have the networks, right? And this is also a very competitive area. And nobody is going to just give you money often like that just because they like you like that. So I know a lot of people say, well, you got to expand your network, yada, yada, yada. These people have never raised money for a business. In most situations, they just talking. And if they say they have, ask them what's their deal flow, what their portfolio look like, what deals have they taken to this particular stage. Ask them about their history in this game, not just internet content, right? So then you're going to go to Series A. That's the next stage, okay? And Series A is designed to get the person a working capital for a certain amount of time, okay? Then you go from Series A to Series B, okay? So then Series B is designed to take the particular company from this particular stage to the next stage, okay? Then you go from Series B to Series C, okay? Then Series C is also designed to take them from one stage to another stage, okay? Then you go from Series C to Series D, right? Sometimes Series F, sometimes Series E, sometimes Series G, with the goal of eventually taking this company public. So here's the first question you got to ask yourself, and we saw this with the Tulsa. You put your money in this deal initially. So let's say you're one of the early investors, right? How long are you willing to have your money locked up before you exit? Because again, we don't ask these questions. So let's say your money is going to be locked up for 8 years. Can you withstand that? Right? Because this company has to go through all of these particular rounds to build itself up to a level to where now you can cash out. Because once you put your money into a private company, you're now in a private market. So how do you exit out of the deal? Have you asked yourself that question? So that was a question for all the people that put their money in a Tulsa fund. How do you get out of that market when you want to? But if I don't know to ask that question, then I don't even ask that question, right? So you put your money into a private deal. How do you get out of the deal? Because the market to get out of that deal is going to be private. If I go buy the SPY or go buy a publicly traded company, right, I can get out just as easily as I got in most situations. But it's a private offer. How do I get out? That's not my opinion. That's not my commentary. These is actually how these situations work. How do you get out of the deal? So when we don't know this, you can just say anything to us, right? You can tell a kid that they're Santa Claus because why? They don't know there's no such thing as Santa Claus. That's why you can tell a kid that there's such thing as Santa Claus. So many of us in certain economic areas, we're being told that there's Santa Claus because why? We don't know that there's not a Santa Claus, right? And you graduated from a college, but you don't know that there's not a Santa Claus on the economic side. You don't know that there's not an economic tooth fairy. You don't know that. You have no idea. You don't know that this Easter, there's no economic Easter bunny showing up, right? That's going to give you some gifts. Doesn't exist, right? Because you don't know any better. So they'll just tell you anything, okay? So that's something that you really got to ask yourself is like, how does this stuff work? Also, when you're going through all these rounds, when you're in these private deals and you're going through all these rounds, through every series, the shareholder is going to be diluted. So you got to understand that if you're one of the initial early investors, as we continue to raise more and more capital, we're going to dilute our earlier investors, right? So your position is going to get smaller and smaller from an equity standpoint over time. That's normally how these deals work, right? So you got to understand that because it's going to continue to take more and more and more capital to get this thing to the finish line, right? That's what you want to kind of understand. And again, why do you think that anything a politician has to say is any importance? That's a question I want to ask you. When you're dealing with a politician, why do you think anything they have to say is important? Right? The only reason I listen to what Trump has to say is because I'm trying to trade it. If I wasn't trying to trade it, I would not care because I don't care what any politician got to say. Unless there's some type of material or some type of economic impact to me, I don't care what they got to say. Like I could care less. Right? I got a lot of other stuff I could be doing my time. The only reason I listen to Trump is because what Trump says, it can move the market. He's shown that. So that's why I listen to what he got to say. When Biden used to speak, I didn't listen to nothing Biden had to say because it didn't matter what he had to say. What Biden said didn't move anything. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? Why do you think what a politician has to say is any important? So why would I sit down in a room with a politician and let him talk to me if I'm not presenting to him my agenda and what I want? Right? So with this group being out of Atlanta, they're talking to a Florida politician. Unless they're going to try to recruit him to push their agenda, I don't know what we need to have a conversation over. Because when you look at groups, and we're going to kind of talk about this, let me bring it back to the class structure, right? Really successful business people, but also really successful business organizations, right? What they do is they hire a lobbyist and they send the lobbyist to go talk to the politician. And what the lobbyist is designed to do is try to make sure that that politician understands what is particular goal of this group, what is particular goal of this organization, and then how can we help persuade you to vote or to move in this particular direction, because that's what's going to be beneficial to this organization. They're not going in there and talking to the person and trying to just like do a photo op. But that's what we get presented with, again, because we believe in economic Santa, we believe in economic Easter Bunny, and we believe in economic, I don't know what the other one was that I talked about, right? So because they know we believe in this, they just reinforce the belief, right? So that's what I want you to understand. Why do you care what any politician has to say about anything? But if you don't have a plan about what you're about, you wouldn't care. So let me tell you what I'm passionate about. This is what Byron can do for me and my group, right? He can get rid of short-term capital gains. right? That's what he can get rid of, right? So short-term capital gains and profits realized from the sale of personal investment property has been held for 1 year or less. So the gains are taxed as ordinary income. One of the reasons why I think it's difficult for lower income people to get into these markets, first, it's going to be capital, but two, it's the way in which they're taxing the capital. So if I can show a lower income person how to trade, the problem now is they got a tax issue, right? That's how you can help me and help the people I'm rolling with. And so I'm not in a position yet to push this through, but God willing, I'm going to be in a position to push it through, right? Because it'll open up a whole new door. But for them to tax gains, they don't have to get rid of it. Just keep it under a certain number. Let's say $100,000, no short-term capital gains. That'll allow a lot more people to be able to come into the market, make money, and not have to worry about, because I'm not holding this over a year, it's going to be taxed as ordinary income, right? See what I'm saying? So that's something that Trump did talk about, getting rid of capital gains. He's not doing that for people like me. He's doing that for wealthy people, but I could get a benefit from it. But God willing, I'm going to be in a position one day to try to push this through, because again, the first issue is you don't have the capital. The second issue is that if you do become successful, they're going to tax you at ordinary income, right? Based on different type of situations. You go talk to your accountant, and you may feel like, well, I'm doing all the work, but they're taking all the money. And I've seen that happen to people. It's something I deal with. I do a lot of work to make money in these markets. I don't like the fact that the government comes in and take a big piece of that money, because they did none of the work. But they do these things to keep people like me out of these markets. That's why they do it, because they're trying to keep this stuff fixed, right? The goal of this finite game is to keep this fixed. So if you're born at a certain level, the goal is to keep you there. So they create a lot of barriers to make sure you don't have the ability to get out of that particular level. They say, well, all you got to do is do 1, 2, 3. But the problem is that I spend a lot of time, money, and effort to educate myself and to become very good at what I'm doing. And then here you come in and taking my money away from me, right? And then you'll also do the same thing to anybody I teach how to do the same thing. So they could be better than me at it, and you're going to come in and try to take their money. And then you got to start doing all kind of really, really elaborate things with CPAs to try to offset that. They can make it real cut and dry. So this is what I'm going to push. So if I would have sat down in there with him, this is what we're going to talk about. It's how we're going to get rid of short-term capital gains. Don't talk to me about how you're going to get rid of the Accredited Investor Act. That don't do nothing for me, right? Because I'm not trying to invest in these early deals. I got a whole course on why you shouldn't invest in IPOs in 99% of the situations. 99% of the time, you shouldn't even look at an IPO, right? Because most of you are not sophisticated enough to understand how to look at a private deal and know the risk of you investing in a private deal. You don't know the risk you're taking by investing in something that's unproven. You have no idea, right? So what happens is you'll put your $1,000 in something, and when it goes south, you don't even know why it went south. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? So this is what I'm pushing. God willing, I'm going to get into a position where I can actually make this take place. But I think this would be a big blessing to a lot of people, because they won't take your money. And I don't need it to get eliminated. I just need it under a certain number. $100,000 would be a big help, right? Because if you can make $40,000 a year on short-term plays and out of the market, and they don't tax you, that'll change your life. It'll put you in a whole different tax bracket in most situations. But here they come in trying to take a big piece of the money that they didn't work for, and they didn't take any of the risk for it. This is a big problem. I take a lot of risk to make the money that I'm making. I don't like the fact that they think they can get a piece of that money, right? Because they're not taking the risk. I'm taking it. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? So that's what me and Byron got to talk about. I don't want to care. I don't care about nothing else that he got to talk about, because I know you're a professional BSer. Okay. So that's pretty much going to be it. But I want to really have you really start to examine the conversations that you have, especially your economic conversations, and having your own agenda and having your own thing that you want to push. Your deal could be different than my deal. I'm cool with that. Everybody got their own deal they pushing, but at least have a deal and have a point of view that you want. And don't be sitting around asking a politician what they think about anything. They don't get paid to think. They get paid to do what they told to do, right? They like soldiers, right? They don't get paid to think. They get paid to do what they told to do. So when you start to realize that, you'll start fanning out. You'll stop fanning out, and you'll stop thinking, well, they doing me this big favor by having this conversation with me. It's not about that, right? And nobody in certain levels of our society deals with them on that particular level, right? So we're going to read these comments and we're going to get up on out of here. Appreciate everybody for coming through. Goddess man, appreciate the $5 super chat. Ray Gun man, appreciate the $2 super chat. Christian, appreciate the $2 super chat. And Truth Bearer, yeah, definitely. But you don't meet a lot of people that say they VCs, but a lot of people try to figure out, yeah, you know what, I can go to a black audience and say I'm a VC and say I went to this particular Ivy League school, and they're supposed to be so impressed because I got on a Brooks Brothers suit. You may have never done a deal in your lifetime. It don't mean you're not going to do one, but it just means I'm not like overly impressed, right? There's a lot of people in the capital markets on all different levels, right? But you got Anglos that was impressed for a long time by Cathie Wood, and she can't invest to save her life. She just burns up people's money, right? So this thing goes on across the board in a lot of different areas. Okay, so appreciate everybody for coming through. Y'all stay safe. Make sure that you manage your risk, and I'll talk to you later.